to episode 278 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Dylan Moore,
Michael O'Malley,
Ash Baker.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our Best of the Decade series with the year 2017. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. Michael, I'm going to kick it off with you. You caught the latest movie from Richard Linklater, who we talked a little bit about a couple weeks ago, but I don't think anybody realized that Richard Linklater came out with a movie this year. So take it away.
Definitely flew under some radars. This is Where'd You Go Bernadette, which is apparently based on a novel, which I've not read. But Richard Linklater is kind of this interesting guy in a lot of ways, but as a figure in film discourse, because he's definitely a lot of people consider him an important director, right? The same school as Quentin Tarantino and Steven Soderbergh or whatever. But I feel kind of unique among a lot of what we would call important directors is that he's completely content with releasing movies that are not important. So he does have his big movies, the Before movies and Boyhood and things like that. But then he's also got Me and Orson Welles, or for example, this movie, Where'd You Go Bernadette, which is resolutely a movie that is small scale, not particularly. I don't think anyone making this movie thought this was going to be a great movie. It's basically. That kind of it's like a family dramedy essentially, in which Cate Blanchett plays this former retired architect who is living with her husband, who is a tech guy. He's developing a a home, Google Home basically, whatever the non-union equivalent of that is. And it's basically about her descent into not exactly mental illness, although that does come up, but her descent into being discontent with her life, which she is the entire movie, but eventually she's moved to action by it and kind of runs away and goes on this kind of fanciful quest or journey, which is where the title comes from, because they don't know where she went. They don't know where Bernadette went.
I think a more apt title would have been, instead of Boyhood, Adulthood.
Yeah, for sure.
How long have you been sitting on
but
that?
But anyway,
I will see myself out.
Bye.
At any rate, I think on Letterboxd I compared this movie to We Bought a Zoo, and that it's that kind of movie where it's never gets extremely serious, but it's not really a comedy either. You're just kind of watching low stakes family hijinks and dramatic kind of soft dramatic stuff play out. And it's really interesting that Linklater makes movies like this, and I really like the idea that he makes movies like this. Where'd You Go Bernadette is fine, as you would expect of a movie like I just described, We Bought a Zoo or something, which is I don't think people will remember it for very long, and it accomplishes what it tries to accomplish, which is to be mildly pleasant for 100 minutes and give actors some material to give some kind of good performances with. Cate Blanchett's very good, for example, as Bernadette, and that's about it. I think the reason people aren't talking about this movie is that there's not a ton to talk about, and it's kind of designed as such. Which I think in and of itself is interesting, because that people talk about this kind of movie disappearing, right? The mid-budget, movies for adults or whatever, there's no gimmick, there's no hook beyond just a kind of middle brow, dramedy, that you could, take your parents to and have a kind of enjoyable evening out. And I feel I'm really damning with faint praise. It's a good movie. It's just not one that I think would inspire strong feelings for anyone. So maybe that means no one's going to see it.
And just to your point though, Michael, it does seem like potentially a sad thing then that, I don't know how many handfuls of filmmakers then would be able to get that kind of budget then for something that is called just a mid-sized adult movie, right? And so somebody like Linklater can get away with it without much of a problem. And he's already, as you say, kind of an eclectic filmmaker himself, so it shouldn't be too surprising. But
yeah, and I mean, maybe that is...
I guess a lot of that stuff now gets moved on to Netflix, right?
Right, and maybe that is the bigger point, is that someone like Linklater, who has this clout and prestige surrounding him, is someone who is the person who can do this sort of movie, and get like Cate Blanchett attached to it and things like that.
Right.
Without it being like really without staking his reputation on it. If this were your debut feature, and I think this movie lost money. In fact, it would be just yet another moral for, here's why we don't have mid-budget adult movies anymore. But with Linklater attached to it, it just is another one of his weird idiosyncratic releases that he does in between the releases that make people remember that, oh yeah, Richard Linklater's great. And like I said, I really dig that he has no sort of pretense about like what kind of movies he has to make. That it just is a movie that I don't know if he just found a muse in it or what, but there's nothing really special about this movie except he just got down and collaborated with a bunch of people who he seems to enjoy and did it. And like a bunch of the movies that he makes that are kind of in that style, like it's not super memorable, but it's also got this kind of baseline just affability and appeal to it that I think is like underappreciated.
And sounds exactly like Linklater as a persona. So there you go.
So
makes sense.
Where'd you go, Bernadette? Or as Zach would call it,
adulthood. Yeah, you're welcome. Maybe it's a naming thing. Maybe that's why people didn't. Who knows? We don't know.
So Irishman.
Yeah, the sequel to
The Irishman was called, I Heard You Paint Houses, right? Well, so Bernadette is a designer of houses. I heard you design houses.
Ooh, yeah. The trilogy.
The trilogy. Wait, what's the other movie in the trilogy?
I can't. Boyhood.
I'll think of it.
Irishman? What? Okay, Zach.
So transitioning from that, let's move to... I'm trying to see if Mary Poppins has anything related to houses.
Aren't they about to lose their house? Don't they?
Yes, it's about a house.
There you go. So you have I paint houses, I design houses, and I lose houses. Ash, tell us about Mary Poppins Returns.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm visiting my parents, and it's very difficult to sort of agree on anything to watch as a family, and so we watched Mary.
Was Handmaid a no-go?
Handmaid was a no-go. A no-go for sure. So we watched Mary Poppins Returns the other night. All agreed upon Mary Poppins Returns. And much like I imagine Where'd You Go Bernadette, it was a movie. It was fine. There were parts of it that like because I'm a huge fan of like original Mary Poppins. It was like very good as a kid, Dick Van Dyke flopping around, with his with his long limbs and the penguins and stuff. And so I sort of went in, a little skeptical, but there were parts of it that were just like genuinely good. Like, I think Emily Blunt, her performance was good. She kind of had that, little sass going on, that little Mary Poppins sass. Lin-Manuel Miranda played sort of like the dirt boy opposite of Mary Poppins.
Is that what we call the chimney sweeps now? The dirt boys.
He wasn't a chimney sweep. He's
the same type of character, though.
It's the same type of character. He's like the working man. He's called a Leary. He's the lamplighter. So he lights.
Sadly replaced by automation.
Yeah. He lights the street lamps and puts them out by morning and evening, and so he's always just around with like some grease smeared on his face, and he has a, what do you call it, like a Cockney accent, um, and it's not very good. That's like the yeah,
It's like
it's not a
the
very good. Like he's one of the few actual American people like playing a part, and they and it's like a really over the top accent. It's
Do you feel like that's like a reference to Dick Van Dyke's accent in the original? Because I think I
you
kind of feel
know
like Dick Van Dyke's accent is like notorious for like what not to do with an accent in the original.
it could be. I didn't think about that, but now that you say that, it could be. I just feel like if we're thinking about Lin-Manuel Miranda as a replacement for Dick Van Dyke, we shouldn't. Um, Obviously he's a really talented film, or not filmmaker, songwriter, like he wrote, the songs and stuff, which are good, by the way. I did enjoy the new songs in the some more than others, but the songs in the musical are good, but he's kind of just like a kind of a clumsy guy, like he can't dance very well, and so he's like doing a lot of dance numbers, and he just kind of like stumbles around a lot. But love Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's fine. Overall, thought the movie was good. There's just like it sort of goes back and forth between being like really cheesy, like British kids movie, into being like yes, like this is my sweet spot, this is what I want to watch, and then just being like ridiculous over the top. So like you have like some just like kids movie silliness, but then you have like a moment that'll genuinely like make you smile. Like there's a cameo by Dick Van Dyke that just like made my heart sing, and I felt so warm inside because Dick Van Dyke came out and flopped his limbs around, and it's just he's just, I love him so much. He's so good, and he's so old, and he's still got it. But then yeah, and there's some songs that are just so good and just on point. Um, but then like we end the movie, like I wish the movie had ended. I felt like emotionally done with the movie, like after the scene where Dick Van Dyke shows up. It's towards the end, but then to spoil the ending for everyone, there's the actual ending of the movie happens after everyone in the entire cast is like lifted up into the sky by helium balloons, and it's just
Yeah,
like
as you
why
do.
is everyone yeah, as you do. So it's like I was emotionally done after Dick Van Dyke left the screen, and like I don't really need this like happy like um revival of an earlier song as the cast is floating through the sky on helium balloons, really.
I think you're forgetting the best part where
Oh yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
they go, "Let's go fly a kite" before they do this, don't they? Isn't that like a line? I remember really rolling my eyes hard at that.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That was before Dick Van Dyke shows up, but yeah,
Oh, was it? Okay.
the whole concept is the adults in the movie were the children in the original Mary Poppins movie, which I kind of thought was gimmicky, but it's fine. It's like Ben Whishaw, our wholesome British king, love him. Um, but I think the best part, as Michael, you and I were talking about um, earlier, is that they do bring back the animated sequence as in the first Mary Poppins movie. And this one is just absolutely wild and trippy. So instead of jumping into a sidewalk drawing, they jump onto a ceramic bowl and that's painted. And so they're inside the painting on a ceramic bowl, and they're going around the curves on the bowl and meeting all sorts of characters who have all sorts of motives, some good, some evil. It's very incredible, and I sort of felt like I was on drugs watching.
They also perform a burlesque show while they're in the bowl.
Yeah, there is a burlesque show while they're in the bowl, which is really good. I enjoyed I enjoyed I enjoyed that whole thing. That was my favorite Lin-Manuel moment in the movie, probably. He was great on the stage. Yeah. Also, Meryl Streep makes an appearance. Wasn't wild about her character. They kind of had her dressed up like a fortune teller lady. She had like a Russian accent or something. Just kind of dove into silliness. I don't know, but very interesting movie. Definitely fun. Definitely entertaining. Definitely watch with your kids. Maybe, just have a good time. Sing along. Chill out. Watch Mary Poppins Returns. It's free on Amazon Prime. No, it's free on Netflix, not Amazon Prime. You have to pay on Amazon
really?
Prime.
I would have guessed it would have been locked in Disney Plus.
Well, it's on there too, I guess, if you'd like to see it.
Well, it's on Netflix as well.
And I'll just specify that you have to have a subscription, so it's not free on Netflix.
Well, it's free if you steal someone's
Thanks, Zach.
password for Netflix.
There we go.
No
All
one
right.
pay for Netflix.
Well, yeah. All right, let's do it. That's how we like to transition it.
Into Marriage Story? That's true. No, joke.
Wow. No, we're not going to transition to the Marriage Story. It's on you, buddy. Light from Light.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Zach. So I had the opportunity last Friday. Paul Harrell's recent movie, Light from Light. He actually came down from Knoxville to the Belcourt to show it. He brought his archival or print, 35 millimeter print for archival purposes, but he actually brought it to show it. And so that was a neat experience. I have questions about that that I wasn't able to ask because there was only a short discussion after, him actually shooting it on film, therefore, making that a sensible option. Or if it was shot digitally and he just liked the feel for 35 millimeter print. But that was a really neat experience for him to bring it down. And I do think the movies, which Andrew and Darren talked about a couple weeks ago, right? That was just 2 episodes ago, Zach? Something like that?
Yes.
So, I just kind of want to insert a little bit, and you can just go back and listen to them talk about it because I think they do a solid job getting to parts of the movie. But if you have the opportunity, I do think it does have a really nice cohesive atmosphere that lends itself well to seeing it in a theater space. A big thing that resonates in the movie as a ghost story and keeping its atmosphere together are both the shots kind of more like B-roll of the foggy early morning Smoky Mountains, right? And then the music coming in that's just really ambient and breathes as kind of a slow lingering sense of everything. And so I feel like that would really lend itself well to seeing it kind of surrounded in a theater space. But sadly, I'm not really sure how long. I think it's only going to be at the Belcourt, for instance, for another 2 days. And then, all the more holiday movies are coming in. So I might not be able to stick around longer than that. But if you do have a chance to catch it, I would recommend it for sure. And just like as another bit of business about this movie that I wasn't able to ask about, but I'm interested in, is, I mean, we talked about Something Anything is kind of like a spiritual movie, and this one definitely is too. But something that wasn't brought up at the end or really talked about in their discussion in the couple weeks ago between Andrew and Darren, nor was it really much focused on in the movie, but I was surprised at the very, very end, during the credit sequence, there was a bit of the Heart Sutra, a Buddhist text, that gets referenced at the end, and I'm not really 100% sure why. I mean, the main specific text that gets brought up in the movie itself is Anna Karenina, that kind of like culminates in this very effective kind of moving excerpt that gets read out loud from that book. But in this case, is a phrase from the Heart Sutra that's just a part of it, but is usually a thing that I think gets referenced a lot as evocative. And I'm not really sure what to make of that. I don't know Paul Harrell much, or much of his religious views outside of his movies, so I just didn't expect that to be in there. So, but that was a neat experience, and couldn't recommend it enough. It's a tight 82 minutes, so it's not too much of a ask like some of the other movies that are out now. And it's right, the lead, Marin Ireland and Jim Gaffigan, and the way they photograph Jim Gaffigan is pretty moving, considering. And I think one of the main takeaways from that discussion after is how surprised everybody was that Jim Gaffigan agreed to be in that movie, in terms of like his persona, and how people usually would receive him as a stand-up comedian, and for him to actually pull it off was a nice surprise. And Marin Island kind of carries the core of the movie, and I was surprised that I actually recognized her from The Irishman. She plays one of the older daughter characters, Frank, in the movie that we see right at the very end, and I was just surprised to make all these connections. And another last bit of trivia, though, and another thing I would like to ask about.
So you're saying,
what's up, man? Yeah, go for it.
So are you saying that Light from Light is I Haunt Houses?
Damn it! Yes, fine, true. It's damn it. Oh, good.
I heard you haunt houses.
Yes,
you did it, Zach. I don't know what we can give you, but you did it. But just the last bit of trivia before we move on is I was surprised to see that both the editor and cinematographer of the movie, the cinematographer Greta Zuzula and the editor Courtney Ware, both did those respective roles in Never Going Back. I don't know what to make of that. That was that comedy that we liked a couple years back, or that was just last year, right? So I don't know how those, friend of a friend connections happened, but that's funny for me to imagine, considering how ridiculous that movie is. So go figure. But Light from Light.
Oh.
Good movie.
Light from Light.
Would recommend.
I heard you haunt houses.
Alternate title, AKA.
So I want to talk real quickly about a movie I caught this past weekend. It is The Mortal Storm, the 1940 Frank Borzage movie. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
Borzage. I knew I got it wrong. Starts Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan, and it's kind of would be a nice double feature complement to Terrence Malick's A Hidden Life that came out this year.
Oh yeah.
Kind of dealing with similar themes there, but this one came out in 1940. A real quick little history lesson. It reportedly was the reason why the Nazi government banned all MGM productions in their occupying regions, because Goebbels and Hitler were not fans of The Mortal Storm, as one would assume. So the movie is about the Roth family. Margaret Sullivan is the daughter in it. Frank Morgan, who you saw with the two main actors in Shop Around the Corner.
Oh yeah.
Plays the kind of patriarch of the family. He's a accomplished professor at the local university, teaching like chemistry or something along that nature. And at the beginning of the movie, he's celebrating his 60th birthday. And he has like this whole there's like this whole drawn out sequence to begin the movie where it's kind of everybody is pretending like they don't remember that it's his birthday, and he is trying to like play it off, and then they have like this big reveal in the classroom where all of his students and peers and family are there to like celebrate the moment for him. And then he's like really touched by the gesture by his two favorite students, played by I think it's Robert Young and then James Stewart, and then it cuts to later in the evening. They're having like this dinner with kind of the friends and family, and he gives this kind of long speech about the work that he's done and how it's such like an old movie like technique. I love it, where he's just like giving this long speech about how they're all together and they'll always have that strength within this bond, and you're just like, well, that's gonna break in like 5 minutes because that's
Wow.
he just has this really like 7-minute long monologue about how strong the connections were.
Not foreboding or anything.
No, it's not, because literally 2 minutes after he finishes, the radio cuts on and they're announcing Hitler's rise to power in the German government. And so a number of the people at the party, including the character played by Robert Young, who is engaged to Margaret Sullivan's character, are excited and charged up by the news that the Nazis are coming into power. And Mr. Roth, along with his wife and Margaret Sullivan's character and Jimmy Stewart, are all kind of passive to the news. They kind of sit down. One of the friends, asking Jimmy Stewart's character, like, why are you not like excited about this? This is good for Germany. This is gonna, get bring the country back up again. And Jimmy Stewart's just like, no, pacifist. And and just a thick German accent, It's just, and so for the rest of the movie, it's a lot about. Well, it kind of divulges into the Nazis are becoming stronger and stronger. It's beginning to divide the family. You have Jimmy Stewart's character.
I heard you divide houses.
No. Michael.
Hey. We got it, baby.
I knew there's a thread here somewhere.
Okay. I know. It kind of, and then it culminates into. I'm saying this right now. We're recording. I'm talking about this all right now as the president is the third U.S. president to be impeached after the House votes on it. It feels weird. Anyway, and so all of this kind of culminates in this moment where Jimmy Stewart and his friends are at a bar. They're just kind of hanging out. Jimmy Stewart has kind of avoided them since the whole dinner incident, but Margaret Sullivan's character kind of convinces him to come back and hang out, and so they're hanging out. Naturally, like, they have to shift the talk into a more political sphere, and at that time, these other Nazi members in the bar begin singing an anthem, and everybody in the bar for the most part is standing up outside of like Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan, and then an older gentleman who we see a little bit earlier as this school teacher that Jimmy Stewart's character knows, and some of the Nazi leadership at the front begin to kind of push him and shove him and berate him for not standing up and taking part in the anthem, and so Jimmy Stewart kind of intervenes and takes him out of the bar, but later on, of course, the Nazis start beating up the old man, and so he takes him back to his house, and Jimmy Stewart has a couple other run-ins where Margaret Sullivan is her character is dealing with whether or not she wants to continue the continue the engagement with Robert Young's character, who is rising the local ranks of the Nazi Party in this German town, while Jimmy Stewart is constantly being picked on by the Nazis. He has one skiff where he gets into a fight with them, and eventually he meets back up with this older gentleman who got in the fight after the bar, who wants to escape into Austria. And so he takes him there, and then the movie kind of shifts to mainly focusing on Margaret Sullivan's character and her relationship with her family, because the father starts to they don't say explicitly because this is code era, but is Jewish, and I forgot. I don't think they say anything. They just say they just refer to him as non-Aryan.
Great.
But you have him and the mother, who are both opposed to the Nazi rise, but then you have two of their sons who are rising within the Nazi Party there in town, who decide to leave home after Jimmy Stewart's character is seen coming out of their house. And so you shift to kind of what the duties for Margaret Sullivan's characters are. Her father ends up being imprisoned and dies. Her mom and the younger brother, they try to escape into Austria but are stopped, and Margaret Sullivan gets off the train and is held because she's trying to take her father's last bit of work into Austria with them, but she's stopped by, of course, Nazi guards, and it culminates in this kind of really just kind of it's a great sequence, but it's just such a kind of strange but also like largely set sequence where Jimmy Stewart comes back to the German town to take her with him to Austria, and they're going to get married, and then the Nazis find out what they're doing and send pretty much everybody that knows Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan from this town to go and take them out. And it ends very much in tragedy. One quick note about the Nazis, who are in this town. It's all of these Hollywood character actors that you've run into. I mean, if you've seen any John Ford movies, you probably seen Ward Bond, where Ward Bond plays a Nazi, and it's hilarious because Ward Bond is the most he doesn't. If Jimmy Stewart doesn't sound German, Ward Bond is definitely not German.
Then again, considering who he plays in some of those movies, he could do that. He's
Yeah, no, it was just more comical to have Ward Bond show up as he's just I'm the Nazi.
I believe you.
You're okay. God. But honestly, I mentioned that I kind of compared this would be a wonderful double feature with A Hidden Life, because it's kind of dealing with the same thing. It's dealing with how the rise of Nazism, especially in terms of how it was rising less in kind of the grander scheme of Germany, but more in the small villages setting, which is something that Hidden Life deals with also, and how the rise of Nazism was very much based on a lot of just a lot of anxiety about the state of the country and where society was progressing. I mean, this is a very rural, kind of agrarian town that they live in. But they have also this, university that the father's teaching at, that is, teaching chemistry and is trying to kind of progress the whole narrative. One of the reasons why he kind of gets listed by the Nazis is because there's this class that he's teaching, and they're asking if you can tell the difference in blood, lesser or better between Aryan blood and non-Aryan blood, and he's just no, it's science, they're all the same. That doesn't make any sense. And so it's just kind of this fight against, it's this anxiety toward modernity and this anxiety toward just the general state of Germany in post World War I, where they were pretty much stripped of everything and ravaged, and so anything that they could latch onto to kind of regain any sort of any sort of power or any sort of dignity they were going to do. But mainly, I think it's more interesting in kind of this small village setting, similar to Hidden Life, because it's these people who aren't coming in contact with a lot of the larger modern riches. You know, they're not in Berlin, they're not in Paris, they're not in New York, they're not in these places where they're going to be coming in contact with a lot of modernity. And at least to me, I think I just find it interesting to watch kind of how that threat of the progression of time really influences a lot of their decision making. I mean, a lot of the people, you know, that a lot of the people, especially like in Hidden Life, they just react to kind of this almost this unseeable force, because you never really see like the physical rise of the Nazis or the physical or any of the kind of physical like tools that are being built that would kind of show this rising in technology. But at the same time, they have newsreels, and they have these other ways that they're kind of seeing it, and because they don't understand it, they immediately rebel against it. It's just kind of like this very basic primal human function. And I think that the Mortal Storm kind of understands that. I mean, I really like this piece from 1997 by Kent Jones, and he says, in Nazism, Borzage finally recognized the formidable enemy of love, adding, more than poverty, more than war in the abstract, more than physical separation or even death, the phenomenon of Nazism posed a real danger to love because it threatened to overshadow and replace it with a man-made negative paternalism. And it's just kind of examining Nazism less through just kind of this basic lens that we have, and looking at it more in this kind of tribal humanistic way, where like to me, I can understand why a small village like that would react in that way at this period of time, just because unfortunately, because they don't have anything else to latch onto in terms of reference points, like all of this being thrown together at once just kind of overloads them, and they react. But then at the same time, you have these people like the Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart and Frank Morgan characters that of course see through it. And so overall, I think it really is incredibly interesting, and I think it understands Nazism at especially early on, and says something interesting about why we got to this point at that period of history, more than a lot of other movies around this period of time, and especially in response to the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. So I would recommend checking out Mortal Storm. I had a torrent in it, but if you
maybe
wanna,
the library,
if you I would check out the library or something. It pops up on TCM a bunch as well. Yeah, no, it's really, I think it's really interesting and really good.
I have a
and you can get past Jimmy Stewart's poor
lack
German
of a Bavarian accent.
Yeah.
I have a question though. Zach, does the university kind of replace the church in Mortal Storm compared to Hidden Life? Because I mean, Hidden Life doesn't have that university setting, but they're both small, rural Bavarian towns. But I don't remember really religion or church being used in that same way in a Mortal Storm.
No, Mortal Storm kind of keeps everything on the level. Yeah. I think Hidden Life, because Malik is so natural at kind of broadening his scope, it like, I think it's doing that for sure. But Mortal Storm, I think it's much more straightforward. But at this, I also felt like it captures that, like I was mentioning, like this, a similar thesis in a way that's still really interesting. Right, sure. Because again, it came out in 1940, and a lot of
more contemporary.
Yeah, exactly, and a lot of movies that were kind of dealing with this were either kind of like Chaplin's The Great Dictator, which is a spoof that's of course referencing the Nazis, but is not using like the Nazi symbols and names and stuff like that. You have a lot of that where it's like they're making a comment but not directly using the Nazis.
And it takes until To Be or Not to Be before, and that's like 2 years after this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or I'm thinking of like something like Casablanca, which is like it's much more looking at it through like the American perspective and like the isolationism of America at that point in time. And so that at least at this period of time, that's what movies were trying to say about like the rise of Nazis, is they're either filtering it through let's just lampoon them, or let's filter it through like kind of charge up America to get America involved. And so this one I found more impressive just because it was much more straightforward in examining like something that felt relevant. And
I mean, a lot like other Brzezinski's other movies, it is definitely a melodrama, and it'll leave you with a certain sense of loss that he's good at conjuring up.
And I think that's perfect though for like this, because I mean, you have the Nazi plot is so is like the main one, but you also kind of have like this side subplot love story between Margaret Sullivan and Jimmy Stewart's characters that is. I think that you can kind of look at it as being kind of, inconsequential to the greater threat that's happening at that point in time, but at the same time, like, it pays off by the end. Like the last 15-20 minutes of the movie, like it's worth having that kind of build up of the relationship and the love between them. It's also worth noting that like Jimmy Stewart was like super hardcore in love with Margaret Sullivan in real life. So,
well, there you go.
Yeah, that helps. But yeah, Mortal Storm, check it out. Try to find it. We're going to take a short break, and then we will be back talking the year 2017 after this.
Hey, Cinematary listeners. Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
With part 2 of episode 278 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Best of the Decade series with the year 2017. So I got a host of topics, then we might hit on a couple single movies. I guess let's just dig into it, because let me just preface that we've already been talking about it for probably 10 minutes off mic.
Oh gosh.
So we might as well just bring it to the recording side. This 2017 was the year that Twin Peaks: The Return came out. We had, of course, the movies or TV episode of Cemetery, which I feel like is still held over my head. I mean, I can't deny that I was laying on the floor just like groaning, like Tina from Bob's Burgers, just like like the entire time. But
I want to make an argument that Bob's Burgers is in fact the best movie of 2017.
That's good too. I like that as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to just now we got to keep it kind of tight because we can't go the entire episode like we did last time. But
Nope.
I do want to talk a little bit about like the delineation between movies and television, not just from Twin Peaks: The Return and kind of why that kind of had its moment where people were relating it to that, but also because I think that both, and I think we can make this point that both movies and TV have like tried to emulate the other ones. I mean, so before I break this up to everybody, I mean, on the movie side, you can look at something like what Marvel's doing, where they literally have episodic movies that you have to watch in order to understand what happens in the Avengers one. Like, I feel like you have that to an extent where it's playing with this narrative structure of episodic storytelling. And on the TV side, it seems like they've, made these, lavish productions designed, heavy budgets, big actors. I mean, something like Game of Thrones, while you may roll your eyes at it, like has the production value of what a movie would be rather than what normally would constitute a television show. And so I feel like that line's been kind of broken to a bit. I feel like at least the debate with Twin Peaks: The Return kind of is a good starting point for that. So, Michael, I'm gonna start with you. I know that you made your debut in the Cemetery with your letter about that episode. So I guess a couple years removed. I mean, what do you make of the kind of discussion of whether something is movie or television, and kind of where Twin Peaks: The Return falls in all this?
I mean, I think on that initial review or episode in which I didn't actually appear, but I had written a lengthy comment on Cinematery's website that was read, and I made the case that Twin Peaks: The Return is a television show because it has an episodic format, and it's the kind of typical arguments for it being television. And so like I think, and we were talking about this off mic or before we started recording, I should say, that there's kind of one conversation that happens that's frustrating regarding this, which is that if something is good enough, then it becomes cinema as opposed to television. And I think some of that has happened with the Twin Peaks: The Return, and no one's trying to claim like that like a season of 24, even though it's highly serialized and in the style of like the Bourne movies and etc. No one's trying to claim that 24 is a movie because it doesn't have that prestige attached to it. And so I think that that's kind of a frustrating and somewhat gatekeepy argument for like what should be television and movies, and no one or people typically don't say it, but it's kind of implied a lot of times in these conversations. So I don't think Twin Peaks: The Return is television because of how good or bad it is. But also one of the more interesting things to come out of this decade is how this kind of represents like a blurring of distribution and how people consume media. And I think that that's a really interesting conversation. If a movie like The Irishman gets released on Netflix and very few people have a chance to see it in a theater, and most people, people might watch it in more than one sitting, and it's the length of like, let's say like a season of like American Vandal or something like that, which is quote unquote a television series, like does that change the medium that we consider that is? And Twin Peaks has kind of that blur a little bit because several of its episodes debuted at, did you guys say it was Cannes? Right, and so like you had like several episodes watched back to back at a film festival. Does that mean it changes from is it still television when it does that? And I think that's a really interesting and unresolved conversation. Something like OJ Made in America has the same quality, which I think that was 2016, not 2017.
That was last year, yeah.
Yeah, but regardless, like I believe that screened in its entirety at a film festival, but also of course was a 30 for 30 special, and so that makes like really interesting discussions as far as what does the medium of cinema mean. Because if you go back 30 years, well, television is what you watch through the television and cinema is what you watch at the cinema. But I think that, especially in the 2010s with streaming and digital distribution and stuff like that, it's not nearly so cut and dry. I mean, I still think Twin Peaks: The Return is television, but it does kind of bait those sort of conversations.
It does, because I think that you made a good point that it kind of is gatekeepery. Like, I think that whether we want to admit it or not, we kind of look at it like you just described it, where television is like, you know, I Love Lucy, Andy Griffith Show, All in the Family. Like, it's that kind of escapey type. You watch it at home on your television. You're engaging with it, but it's not really taking the amount of like mental power that you would if you were like in the movie theater, like where you're like outside a little bit of your comfort zone. You're away from your house. You've like gone to a location in order to engage with a piece of culture, and like that, and that was my whole thing. Like, if you want to call Twin Peaks: The Return, again, which I have not watched, if you want to call it movies, that's fine. I think my whole gripe then, and my whole gripe now still is, if there's just multiple ways to tell a narrative, and so if the goal for Twin Peaks: The Return was to watch it all in one sitting, I feel like he probably would have made it in that fashion. Like, I don't think it's not like it was something where it's like Netflix where he would have chopped, like he got forced to chop it up. I think that there is something that he's trying to set up maybe psychologically in terms of your viewing pattern to have to separate the episodes and watch them, once a week in that kind of succession, because sometimes sometimes stories just are more effective that way. I think about kind of comparing it, this might be way off the reservation, but I think of it like how we engage with something like a video game compared to a movie, because video games are constantly trying to emulate the kind of movie going experience, when what you get most out of playing a video game is kind of that immersion into this world where it kind of it's giving you like it's giving you the control of the narrative rather than kind of watching it passively on a screen like you would with a television show or a movie. And so I feel like the argument between TV or movie kind of comes down to a misunderstanding on how the narrative structures of both work, where one is a kind of continuous, one sitting type experience, while the other is kind of a fragmented experience, because the author of it was purposefully doing that. Dylan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So I mean, to kind of like consider both different things that both you, Michael, and Zach, that you've brought up. It's interesting that you bring up kind of like older, like 50s, 60s comedies like I Love Lucy, Andy Griffith, The Honeymooners, these kind of things, that those are of a sitcom format, right? They're like a tight, like 30, so, and those two have to like take into account of advertisements in the middle of them that movies don't have to take in consideration. And so sometimes with sitcoms, that as soon as they come back from commercial, they have to like easily summarize what's been going on if you either hadn't seen the first part or just forget because you got blasted with ads for like 5 minutes. But no, that's an interesting thing then to consider when thinking about the melding of production and distribution as it stands now, Michael, that you've brought up, to where it's not quite like that anymore. There's still TV programming such as it is, but now that you can strip it out of that context and put it on the internet. And I mean, you still, like, even going back and watching the original run 2 seasons of Twin Peaks on Netflix, you still get those like hard fade out moments that you get with TV that are supposed to lead you into an advertisement, but you can watch them in such a quick succession that there was no way you could do that even when it first came on. You'd have to tape it, right? Or some way of like actually putting it and keeping it on for yourself, as opposed to being able to just finding all of it on the internet in a quick small space. And so, but to this point though, with Lynch talking about what he was thinking with Twin Peaks with Mark Frost, that he really enjoyed the idea of it being a TV show. This notion that a lot of people came around their television every week to watch a continuous story. And I mean, at a certain point, he really held like a love and affection for the whole setting of Twin Peaks and the town and all the characters. And, there's a lot to be said that all of those machinations and all those characters, it's really hard to actually work up a machine like that with something as limited in time and scope as movies is. I mean, one of the first things that come to mind that got close to it is maybe like Margaret, but even then, that as a movie is still contained and even with the extended cut, 3 hours. So, but to that point though, that Lynch specifically set out to make it as a TV show and appreciated the notion of episodes and, everybody gathering around every week to do it. But it gets a tricky notion though, because he is a prominent filmmaker. And as we said, that it was first 2 episodes were shown at Cannes, that, the production of this actual show, it happened all at once and it was written all at once, while older TV shows are written week by week, and it's hard to gauge what it's going to be like, other than the fact that we have these handful of characters that we know we can just spin the wheels on. So I feel like I just blurred the can of worms again to mix a metaphor, but
yeah. Well, no.
Yeah.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I think that's why I say if you want to see it as a movie, that's fine. But I don't think that there should be a disregard for the TV model of thing. I don't think if Twin Peaks: The Return was is TV or was TV or whatever, I don't think that makes it lesser. I think that it's all about what it's trying to do in terms of telling the narrative. And there's something I think I think Lynch is correct that there is something interesting about that. I mean, because I definitely felt it watching through the run of Breaking Bad, where you see the episode one day a week, and then you just have that whole week to kind of break it down and discuss it and kind of just sit there and ponder on it before the next week when the next one will come out. I think there is something useful about that. Rather, there's something useful about sitting there and just experiencing it all at once as this kind of main, this one amalgamation. But I think there's also something interesting about kind of breaking it up in that fashion.
It's worth mentioning that I mean, as much as you did compare Marvel to television earlier, but the conversation rarely goes the other way. We had a Breaking Bad movie this year, and then several years ago we had a Veronica Mars movie, and no one was trying to make the argument that they were television. It usually is only going one way, which is that this television show is actually a movie, which I think speaks to the fact that a lot of times these conversations sometimes happen in bad faith and are really just talking about, we really like this thing, but we don't watch enough television, and so we want to claim this as the thing we normally watch.
And that's why I say I agree with you that it's very gatekeepery, but this is not something that's just new to movies and television. I mean, it's any sort of art form or culture device has always had this, where the first one, I mean, oral stories led to books to theater, I think there's just constantly this, if you look at just the string of narrative through the course of human history, we always have, where you kind of have this gatekeeper mentality for the thing that came before you. And so it's nothing new, but at the same time, I think that the only way to break that is to kind of find an appreciation for what the other is doing in terms of its mode. Ash, do you have any thoughts or feelings about this whole concept of the movie or TV or just Twin Peaks in general?
Yeah, I mean, you guys have covered most of my general thoughts on it. Generally, it's TV. It's really good. It's better than a lot of movies. But it's still television, and that doesn't, make it worse. I think just the thing for me is that, for some film people, just we're talking about just different types of mediums or forms, and for some reason a lot of cinephiles are just obsessed with film as the highest form or the highest medium, and I don't really think that, well, I certainly don't view that as being the case. And I think that whatever medium you need to use to best tell the story is the best medium. And so David Lynch, obviously an incredible filmmaker, makes a television show. It's an awesome television show. He's doing what, he does best, but he's doing it in a different form just because he wants to do a different form and just because he thinks that the story that he needs to tell will do better in that form. And I think that he's successful in that. And so it's like, I remember when, you're talking about like the superhero movies and how they're like episodic and stuff. And it's like, they're doing exactly what they're sort of executing their idea. Their form is not to create like an incredible work of art that is episodic in nature and keeps going on and on and on. Their form is just to keep making money, and they're successful. But, I think the first instance of me sort of thinking about this was when like the Hobbit movies came out. Like way back when. I was like, I don't remember when the first one came out, but I just remember watching it, and it was way too long, first of all. And and it was only like they split the whole book into 3. And I was like, this movie, I was like, first of all, this is only 1/3 of the movie and it's so dragged out. I was like, this could have been one movie, and it was just like the complete wrong form. It was either the wrong form or they were just dragging it out, like the superhero movies, just to make more money off of it, just to sort of linger in the audience or whatever. But yeah, that's basically my 2 cents. It's TV, but it's really good.
And just a last thought off of what Ash you said, and then what makes Twin Peaks: The Return just particularly exciting in its own way. Then, and Zach, something you've also brought up is this kind of tension between a continuous story versus a fragmented one between movies and television. That it ends up playing into that in an interesting way with all the point of views of different characters and literally messing with the perception of time and space inside of it. So you don't really need to dig too far down into the themes of that show to get that. So that's thanks for bringing that up.
Well, kind of shifting from movies or TV to something that's much more strictly a movie. I think the one movie that I would like to talk about just kind of on its own for this year is Phantom Thread. I know I think we've talked about it extensively if you look back at our backlog for 2017.
Probably.
But this was easily my favorite movie from 2017. I rewatched it the other day to kind of prep, for the episode. And the thing I kind of to toss it off to everybody else, the thing that I was thinking about while watching this that I feel like is something that Paul Thomas Anderson does for the most part in his movies. I mean, I think that there is kind of a historical or like a locational context to his movies. I mean, like even Inherent Vice and most of The Master and Boogie Nights for sure kind of has this context. But something about Phantom Thread I was thinking is it really has no like historical or locational context to it. I mean, he's in London, but it's not like it's tied to any. It's not like it's one of those movies where some larger event's happening in the background. Like you kind of could put this in most any other metropolitan city, and it would work. But it's just like this movie and this narrative that's completely living in its own time, place, and space that. I feel like that's the thing that, at least for me, while watching this most recent time, was like the most alluring, like transfixing factor of it was that it just was living on its own terms in its own world. And I feel like that's just a quality that more movies, at least the good movies, are able to find. I think that we could probably say the same about Twin Peaks, which we were just the Return that we're just talking about. That Phantom Thread just really lives in its own space, and I felt like that's the thing that kind of made it so unique in that way. I mean, what do you guys make of that movie? Kind of looking back at it 2 years later.
I think it's great.
Yeah, same. I'm interested though, Zach, of this notion you're talking about space like this, that maybe just because the score is so effective and the characters feel such on their own, but I would hesitate though to say that it doesn't have a specific context that it's working in. I mean, so much of that can feel like on the periphery, or when it does start kind of bubbling up to the surface, that it feels like more uncomfortable or soon to be shooed away. Like, the fact that Alma's character is, Jewish, and these kinds of racial tensions or ethnic tensions that are happening with some more of the side characters, with Woodcock and her being together. But it does feel very specifically of a time and place, but because when it was made and how effective it is, that it can feel, I don't know, I guess, contemporary, but yet also ethereally forever or whatever. If
Isn't the Daniel Day-Lewis's character, his style, like, isn't part of the thing his style is kind of out of time, like, or out of pace with, like, whatever contemporary styles are going on, and so, like, he as a character is sort of adrift in time.
Yeah, they were
in that way.
Yeah. He was freaking about being chic. You want to use that nasty word, chic? Yeah. And then his sister, like, immediately shuts him down. Like, well, that's what pays the bills, Woodcock, so, quit your shit.
Yeah. No, Dylan, I guess to your point, like, I get that. And I think that there are, like, these, factors, that work within the narrative that are linked to something happening, in kind of the locational context. But at the same time, I guess you used a good word to describe it. It kind of works on this. It doesn't really feel like it has a place because it's kind of contemporary, but it also feels like it's working in this, ethereal space, because it's not like a movie where it's like, Reynolds Woodcock is a fashion designer, in the twilight of World War II. It's not like it has this. Sure. It's not like it has this very kind of typical, kind of. Even like The Irishman this year, it's like you have like the context of like the Kennedy presidency and things of that nature that kind of it doesn't completely overrun the narrative, but it like kind of informs a lot of the decision making and narrative beats that the plot kind of goes in. And Phantom Thread, since it lives in kind of this it feels like the entire area that he's encompassing is just kind of in this bubble that's there but not really there. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about on this most recent rewatch.
Or when it does, as you say, that the specific instance I have in mind is that wedding that he has to go to. He makes a dress for this woman's wedding, who apparently is bankrolling a lot of their work, right? That I believe it's a countess or something like that, but she's getting married, and they end up like in a press room where she gets grilled with a lot of questions while Woodcock and Alma are on the sideline, just watching in. And it feels, something that could happen now, but yet talking about countesses and more like this kind of elite royalty situation. So it doesn't feel. It's both specific and not. I guess that's kind of a blurring thing. And I guess specifically a function of a romance movie, which is definitely is, like trying to generate this etherealness or kind of floating possibility. I don't know.
Ash, what are your feelings on Phantom Thread a couple years after it came out?
So it's really funny. I actually saw this movie. It was... I think a bunch of us went to see it right when it came out, and I remember leaving the theater really frustrated, and I did not like it, and I remember getting into a big argument with Andrew in the foyer of the theater about this movie. There were raised voices. It was
sorry.
It got kind of ugly.
Yeah.
But then as time went by and the Phantom Thread out of context Twitter, seeped onto my timeline.
Please, yes.
I was enticed to watch it again, and let me tell you, every time I've watched it again, I have fallen more in love with this movie.
Wow.
I think the real kicker was the first time I watched it, I was just like demanding to myself that like I hated the characters, that I just like I hated the protagonist, and I didn't understand any of the characters, and I just like, you know, was just disgusted with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the more time I spent with this movie, the more I realized that I was the protagonist, and that I just needed to, you know, find someone to make me some mushrooms and
make me a mushroom
and
omelet,
take
please.
care of me.
Oh my!
A mushroom omelet and take care of me. And I think this is possibly the most like romantic movie I've ever seen. I love it so much. Honestly, relationship goals.
I'm really like interested to hear that the Twitter bot or the grab of no context worked for you in that way, because
it really did do a lot for me. I think the first time I saw the movie, I couldn't see the humor in it.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's so funny.
And then the more time I spent with it, I was like, this is hilarious. I was like, this is the funniest movie I've ever seen.
So
and also
much.
Everyone in this movie is also me. And I hate it and I love it. And it's perfect.
I really enjoyed in this rewatch of like really following the Cyril character, Woodcock's sister, right? Because like, I guess if we're having to think of this as like kind of a triangle between these three characters, at least, that her like really at that breakfast table, you could really start feeling where her character is like really working. Just like how much the camera like almost shifts to her point of view at that table, because sometimes like Woodcock, you know, he may say something, but he's like usually off to that side of the table while the camera is kind of more at the other end, and just like Cyril kind of commands the camera with her eyes is interesting. And
it's funny, like I also, the first time I watched it, didn't really see it as a romantic movie at all.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, now I just have this fondness in my heart for it. And the other day, you know, Twitter has been ablaze with all of the Marriage Story discourse. And so I added to that and said Marriage Story, but it's just in a couple quietly disagreeing about what to eat for dinner. and Nathan responded to me and said, "That's Phantom Thread." And I was like, you know what? You're actually right.
You know how I like my asparagus with salt and oil. What is this, butter? Oh my god! What?
It's just like it's a very wholesome. It's not wholesome at all, but it's I'm fond of it.
There you go.
I want to shift.
Goodness.
We got a couple topics that we can probably get to. We've, you know, eaten some amount of time with our omelets and mushrooms for sure. But I feel like one movie we'd be remiss not to talk about is Get Out, which came out in 2017, and I felt like it's been kind of. I think one, it's a big. It's kind of an intersection from a topic that we talked about a few weeks ago. We were talking about the elevated horror topic, and I think that this is kind of an intersection between the concept of elevated horror with kind of a more big budget, like, you know, multiplex type movie. I think, you know, Get Out kind of has all the degrees of like what you would assume, what we would classify as elevated horror, but does it in like was like a massive, you know, box office hit. It also kind of affirmed Blumhouse as like this powerhouse kind of production company, which was, you know, taking the very age old model of low budget horror that you know, if it turns a big profit, then it's, you know, a big win for them. And it also, you know, cemented Jordan Peele as kind of this driver of he became kind of the horror auteur for on like kind of a larger scale. I mean, even Us, which I felt like was a little bit more mixed in terms of reviews compared to Get Out, still was a big hit and is still being kind of talked about now at the end of the tail end of the year. And so I guess looking back at it for you all, what about Get Out kind of stays with you outside of just the movie? I mean, do any of those kind of points strike you as something that's still taking a hold of kind of the culture at large, or the movie culture in 2019?
Well, I think Get Out's interesting in that it's one of the rare movies that's not not like a Marvel or Star Wars or kind of these movies that have built-in like, massive audiences. But it's one of those ones that like I feel like totally had a huge like zeitgeisty impact on like how people talk about the world, and I feel like that this decade. I mean, we don't need to rehash this yet again, but like television did that quite a bit this decade, whereas film less so outside of like Marvel and that sort of thing. And I think Get Out is just a really interesting example of like that film can still have that moment, and I think also bolstered by like Get Out has sort of like a meme presence in a lot of ways. Animated GIFs of Get Out like show up frequently. The sunken place became kind of like a concept that is like talked about quite a bit, especially online. And it's just interesting as a movie that like in some ways is really classical. Like it has all these like old horror movie illusions, like Stepford Wives and that sort of thing. But in another way, like the way that people responded to it was in such a thoroughly modern way, and a way that like hit so many people in so many different ways. I think like that line, there's just like some throwaway lines that just feel like became discourses unto themselves. Like how the guy's like, I would have voted for Obama for a third term, and how that one line just became indicative of like a whole like subset of like a classification of like conversations that people have. And I just think that's really interesting because I talk about movies a lot on the internet and on Cinematary or whatever, but as far as like my day-to-day life, I don't have that many movie conversations with people. But Get Out is absolutely a movie that like everyone I knew, including people who weren't that into movies, was talking about, and that's such a rare experience for me.
I mean, to that last point though, Michael, would just be how canny of a director Jordan Peele is, though, right? I mean, that phrase itself was, I don't think, generated by the movie, but it catapulted it or like propagated it out a lot faster as like a meme-like quality, as you say. That I think is interesting.
But
that it's able
like
to tie both as
like
like
the Obama line.
Yeah,
I think like the movie contextualizes that sort of line,
sure.
though. Like as far as like it's ultimately the villain who says this, and the kind of I don't know whatever. We don't have to get like too much into politics, but there's definitely like a subset of like when we talk about the Democratic primaries that is defined by that line, and a lot of the divides as far as like how people view the world have function along those lines. How you posture yourself toward like certain historical moments as opposed to actually posturing yourself toward like actual substantive change.
Yeah, I mean, but to that point, I meant it specifically as how much he was able to weave in what is whatever easily considered quote unquote genre trappings, but making it have this immediate resonance, right? It's like he has the history of these other movies behind him that he can use as like resonators to actually bring in that more whatever feels potentially quote unquote more contemporary context, even though that was there almost all along. Right, I don't know.
If we're talking about
that makes
trends,
any sense.
Do you guys feel like I mean, so Get Out, Zach, you brought it up in the context of elevated horror. To me, Get Out feels like an anomaly in the sense that it broke out of elevated horror to become like this cultural thing. I'm trying to think of any sort of other examples of, elevated horror that felt like this much of like outside of that own. Like, is this the only one that really like broke out of that realm?
I would say so, because even something like Hereditary had I don't know how much of like a how much out of like the cinephile kind of circle would that have had? It didn't really have an impact. I mean, Get Out was something that not only people who were like interested in movies were watching, but like everybody was watching this movie. I mean, this was a massive hit, and so, but I feel like it kind of also carries very distinct features of kind of that elevated horror, just in the way that Peele goes around. In terms of just kind of very technical things, like the way he shoots various scenes. I mean, it kind of has that. It seems like it has more of a thought process in terms of the alignment of shots and the production design, the art design, and all this than your typical like horror movie that's made to be like a big movie. I think we only think of Get Out as kind of this like box office hit blockbuster now because it became one, but when it was being designed, it was being designed on the same level as like a Happy Death Day or like The Conjuring. Like I was kind of on this very like medium level, but it just elevated itself too. So that's why I think it's probably the best example of like a movie with the techniques of like an elevated horror rising above kind of that rank.
I think that's interesting because I think like one of the backhanded ways people sometimes describe elevated horror is that they're horror movies for people who don't like horror movies, but like in the end, like I don't think that they reach much of an audience outside of horror movie people or cinephiles or that kind of crowd, whereas this one, I mean, like you mentioned, what did kind of break out, which maybe that's just interesting to me.
The other thing, and this one I don't think we'll have as many thoughts on, so we can kind of get to it quick. I do want to talk about how the fact that like Stephen King has taken over a lot of culture, not only just movies but TV as well. Like both are infected with Stephen King fever. 2017 is the year that It came out. Of course, that was like a massive hit. I don't think the second one really had the same impact as the first one did, but the first one kind of was another one of those big blockbuster horror movies from the year. Michael, you mentioned that you have the show Castle Rock that comes out. A television series. You have it seems like the just kind of grabbing even like smaller Stephen King things. This is I saw that Gerald's Game, the movie on Netflix, came out the same year. Is
this when Stranger Things came out? Because Stranger Things is heavily infected.
This is also around the time that Stranger Things comes out, and so I think that Stranger Things is definitely the kind of jumping off point for this warped 80s nostalgia that is not only just Stephen King but also like Spielberg and people like that. But I feel like Stephen King still has like kind of really like it just seems like there's this craving in the culture to see his stuff brought to life. I mean, as recently as Dr. Sleep a couple weeks ago. Do you all have any thoughts on I guess why out of 80s culture, which has been mined so deeply over the past decade, why Stephen King has kind of been I would say like the leader in most content mined from his body of work.
I mean, I think part of it is just that he has the most content, period. I mean, I'm looking at his Wikipedia like bibliography, and there's well over 50 novels that he's written.
Yeah.
But I think another thing too is that like on the book side of things, like of course Stephen King has been writing all along, but like starting in the 2010s, his novels, I don't know if they were better received, but I think that they definitely were more. I guess they were better received. So something like Under the Dome or 11/22/63, which were both like at the very beginning of this decade. I remember because I've been a Stephen King reader for quite some time, but I definitely remember a lot of people, like including my dad, being like, "Hey, Stephen King books are good again," and I think that like kind of in a way like made Stephen King more popular because like before that you had things like Doohickey or like The Colorado Kid or Cell, like which aren't particularly like well liked Stephen King books, and definitely don't have like big adaptations. If you think of like the big Stephen King adaptations, they're like 90s and older. And so I think there's like this dry spell in the 2000s where Stephen King, both as a writer but also as like things adapted from his work, kind of went into remission. And then like when his books started getting a little bit more popular again, because I think he maybe had some inspiration then I think the adaptations kind of followed, and that happened to coincide with a lot of the, Generation X nostalgia as well. So, 11/22/63 and Under the Dome were both made into TV series. I'm looking through some of the other ones too. But I do think it coincides with his career as a novelist.
Do we think his, might be a small thing, but he's kind of like a cool guy on Twitter. Do we think his Twitter presence has anything to do with his, I don't know, Stephen King is cool again?
I mean, I think you're onto something. Yeah, because I think that people
keeping himself in conversation, is that a?
I think people are able to like reinvent their, I hate the word, but like reinvent their brand through like how they're interacting online. I mean, I know people who are like, yay, Stephen King, because he's, thumbing it up to the president constantly, it's like it's like a simple thing like that. But I think there is something to, having a online persona that is appealing to large swaths of people, and in turn makes them become much more infatuated with your work. Unfortunately, that's a stupid thing to happen, but
I think also like some of the Stephen King, his staying power as a cultural figure is like really tied to like the older adaptations that get a little bit of a revival this decade. So you also had the Carrie remake, was that like 2013? And I think like that did less to establish that remake, but more to re-establish the like Carrie narrative as like an important narrative that like cultural kind of folktale almost, that people really enjoy. And so like I think the De Palma film kind of had a kind of a return to prominence, and because of that. And I think a lot of his stories have a sort of rich like mutability to them, where people can get a lot of interesting things out of them. And he's always been like a guy with like interesting big ideas, in a way that sets him apart from like, I don't know, like Dean Koontz or like other kind of paperback genre writers. And I think that makes his work easy to transport to other eras too, with something like Carrie, or The Stand, or things like that. Or you can look back at those old adaptations and find things in them that can be recontextualized for the 2010s in powerful ways.
Yeah. Any real quickly, any shout outs to 2017 movies that you feel like should earn some love? I'd just like to say real quickly, Columbus, fantastic.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Good Time, Personal Shopper, yeah, like both of those. Lady Bird, that's a thing with both. A lot of people coming out with another movie this year. Jordan Peele with Us, and Greta Gerwig has Little Women coming out real soon, right?
With Good Time. There's a new Star Wars movie coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was the year of The Last Jedi, which is the best Star Wars movie ever made. So that's strange.
Thank you. Why would they do that? They made the best one. It's fine.
I know they made the best one. Whatever. All right. Well,
one movie from 2017 that people don't talk about a lot that I really like, and again, this is a director who also has a movie out this year, Wonderstruck, which is a Todd Haynes movie.
Never ended up watching
which
that.
I think is like a really beautiful movie, but no one talks about it. It's like the weird, like forgotten Todd Haynes movie.
And he's also comoming out with a movie, Dark Waters, right? That came out recently.
Yeah, that will probably also be forgotten, given what I've seen. But Wonderstruck is just like a really, really beautiful little movie. It's like a kids movie, but it's like an art house kids movie. I don't know if kids would actually like Wonderstruck. I thought it was cool.
I'll be honest. I've watched Wonderstruck, and remember being bored. But I also don't remember much from that movie.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
I think it's good.
The end.
That's divided.
I believe that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, on Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Of course, as you can also support Cinematary on Patreon, patreon.com/Cinematary. We'll have a new Film Theory and Chill episode coming out very soon for your. So if you want to escape the holidays for a little while, you can listen to us talking about Tomas Alcesser, the late film historian and writer. But yeah, so we got a lot of great stuff there on the Patreon page. Another decade podcast that I did with my newsreel co-host Brian Welk is on there. So if you want to listen to me talk about a number of the movies that we talked about in this episode, including Phantom Thread, you can listen to that. But thank you to our patrons: Cam, Chad Newsom, Christina Daughtry, Chris Metcalf, Cindy Roberts, Intomoth, Graham Jones, Harry Eskin, Maggie, Marie Barty, Matthew Lingo, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for supporting the website. Go over to cinematary.com right now. We have reviews of Six Underground by Michael Bay, Marriage Story, so check it out there. But yeah, next week we will be heading into 2018. We're getting close to wrapping this thing up, so we'll see you then.